Brian, what's going on, man? Glad to have you back on the Order of Man podcast.
Ryan, I tell you, I think what it's been almost 5 years since we last talked, recorded, at least for your podcast. You've since come on mine in between then, but I'm just pumped to be back, as well as excited to see the amazing growth that you've had with your business, going all in on it, and it really shows. I think if you get a smart guy who was willing to put his head down and work like crazy, look what can happen. I mean, it's a great story. Like, it's a great case study for people to look at, and that's you, man. So it's huge props. I'm excited to be back, man.
Yeah, it's funny because we were looking at it when you came on the show, and it was what do we say? May of 2015 is when you. So it's episode 8. So
That's
I hope
amazing.
this conversation.
How many, like 500 or 600, like 600 or 500 since then, or how many? I know some of yours are solo and Q&As.
3 shows a week now, but I think I want to say we've done 200 and maybe 50 or 60 interviews, and then another 250 other types of shows. So we're 500 plus shows into this thing now.
Dude, congrats, man. It's so cool to see all the, especially like the impact, you're having on so many people that sometimes, when you're such a heads down worker, every once in a while you put your head up to say, this is really amazing what's happening right now, and the impact, because you have such a ripple effect too. It's not just the immediate guys that you're impacting, but it's all of the people and their lives. I mean, think about the ripple effect, man. I just think it's worth it to reflect every once in a while on that. And I'm really I feel lucky and proud that I was a part of your show at its very beginning, man.
When it was nothing. It is interesting, though, because, you're in very much the same boat, and props to you for the book that's coming up and all that you've been doing, and the interviews and the speaking. I follow you on social media, and we've been connected a little bit here over the past several years. But it is pretty interesting when you have a desire to lead in some capacity, and then you step into it fully and put yourself out there, which is obviously presents its own set of challenges, especially in the world of social media and everything else that we do. But it's pretty cool to be having this conversation. And look, when did you start the podcast? Was it about the same time that I started mine, or was it? Yeah.
So it's going on its fifth year.
Okay.
As we get to 2020 now, and it's really amazing to see when you. And I'm curious why you started yours initially, because I think for me it was just this innate curiosity to learn from people who have sustained excellence over an extended period of time, to understand some of the intricacies, to unpack that, and follow my genuine curiosity towards those types of individuals. And I, much like you, I find it is such a worthy use of time to have long-form conversations with those types of individuals, and then to see the impact you can have on others while you're learning yourself is really cool. It is a really rewarding feeling, and so that's why I initially got into it, and I gather yours is something similar.
Yeah, no doubt. I had another podcast before this one and loved the medium of podcasting, but wanted to shift up the conversations. But it was selfish, frankly. Mm-hmm. It's like I wanted to have great conversations with highly successful men, whether it was in the entrepreneurial space or the family space or fitness, whatever capacity that they were excelling. It was my goal to have conversations with these guys, and then to be able to share. I mean, that's the cool thing, is that not only is it this opportunity to have conversations with these people, but then to also share and quite literally reach millions of other people across the planet. And you talk about the ripple effect generationally even, right? If one guy listens to this podcast or your podcast and just picks up one little thing, just one little tidbit of information, and it helps him connect more deeply with his wife, or connect with his kids, or start a business, or lose 30 pounds. Just that one little change then impacts his children and the people he's leading at work, and the people that he sees in the community, and his neighbors that he's serving. And then that impacts their family. It's wild. It is so wild. A lot of the times we look at our numbers, right? We look at our social media stats, You think, okay, cool, we've got 100,000 people here and 50,000 people over there. That doesn't even skim the surface on how many people that you and I and others that are in this space are impacting. And that's a very powerful opportunity that we have.
Yeah, for me, it's certainly the fuel, or at least some of the fuel, when you get that heartfelt, thoughtful note, whether it's an email or a handwritten note, when somebody shares some of their story about the impact that you've had on their life because you had the guts and were willing to click publish, right? You're putting what you're doing is you are willing to be judged. You are putting yourself out there for others to judge by publishing your work, whether it's written like you have in Sovereignty, or what you like the videos that you put online, and certainly with the podcast. You're putting yourself out there to be judged. And I read pretty much every one of your AMAs as well within your Facebook group. And sometimes I'm just like, wow, like I am really impressed that he's got the guts to take a stand and to have a point of view. And when you think about leadership, those are some of the qualities that I really want in somebody that I'm going to follow. Those are the people that I'm trying to emulate, is that they're not afraid to have a point of view. And they know people at times are going to disagree with them, maybe not like them, but probably they're going to have to respect them, right? Because you've put thought into what you're thinking and what you're saying. You're not just rambling. You're not just speaking off the cuff. You've actually put some dedicated thought and reflection into what you're saying to those people. And I think as we shift into talking a little bit more about leadership, that to me are the type of leaders that we like. Think about the leaders in your life who you followed, right? They have some of those qualities that they're not afraid to have a voice. And I think for me, that's been part of my evolution as well, is because initially I was more like a cover band. And a cover band, right? You can make a decent living. You can have a fine life. You can go play other people's songs, right? This is obviously an analogy. I'm not a musician, but you can cover the work of others. But eventually you got to start playing your own stuff. You got to start writing your own music, start having the guts to play it in front of people, to be judged and to see what they think. And I think that's the evolution certainly you've been on over the last 5+ years, and me as well. And it's fun as we get into these stages to start sharing what we truly believe through the course of our life experiences and what we've learned from so many smart people.
Do you think that's the biggest thing that keeps people back from stepping into leadership, is the fear of judgment, the fear of ridicule, the fear of pushback, and being under the microscope and scrutiny, or is it something else?
Well, I just think it's so much easier to follow, right? Then you don't have the responsibility if it goes bad. You don't, and then you've talked a lot about this. Like it's a much more comfortable life to follow. And great leaders, don't get me wrong, are good followers, right? There are people you look up to, obviously, that you're following, but they're helping you become a leader. And leadership, first and foremost, as you know, is a distinctive choice. You must make that choice to lead. That's one thing all great leaders have in common, is the fact that they've made that choice to say, I will take ownership. I am responsible. I want the responsibility. This is much why I liked playing the position of quarterback, because that position has the greatest influence on the outcome of the game, of the win or the loss. It's, sometimes maybe you play receiver, and as a receiver, you're dependent on so many other things, and you could even sometimes have a pretty good game, but it's not going to necessarily have an impact on the outcome of the game. As a quarterback, though, if you play bad, your team is probably going to lose, and if you play well, your team is probably going to win. I personally love that responsibility. It kind of juices me up on a daily basis to be in a leadership position, to say, well, a lot of this is rest on my shoulders, and I consciously make that choice daily. And I think that's what, you talk about what it means to be a man. I think that's part of what, for me at least, what it means to be a man, is to make that choice every day.
It's interesting, though, because you say, it's comfortable. And I think about times in my life where I followed maybe a little too long and it wasn't comfortable for me. Like I hated it. In my financial planning practice, I worked with an organization that I didn't feel like I had a whole lot of flexibility and freedom. And it was like, do it this way. This is the way that we do it. And for me, it wasn't comfortable at all. It was miserable. And so I felt like, I'd rather take the risk of going out and starting my own organization, starting my own company, and going through all of the work and the red tape with regards to financial planning to do that. And that to me was significantly better than just being under somebody's thumb. But I'm wondering if that's
I don't think you're
personality
normal.
or what.
I don't think you're normal, and I mean that I think as a compliment. I think you're the exception to the rule. Because the way it viscerally made you feel to follow is not how most people are. However, then you also probably felt some of the as you step into making that choice to lead, you start feeling some of the reward, some of the freedom, also some of the responsibility. And knowing you as I've followed you for a while now, I get the sense that responsibility and ownership is part of what keeps you going every day, right? Like you want to be the leader of your family, of your tribe, of millions of people who are listening and following what you do. That to me seems part of your makeup as you've evolved. And but I don't know if that's normal though. I think that's probably unique to you and certainly others, but in this case, I think it's unique to you.
So then do you talk to guys that have the desire to lead, and gals too? I mean, I know you're talking to both men and women, but the desire to lead and that's who your audience is? Or is it those who feel like maybe that's what they're, supposed to do, is supposed to lead? Like who is it that you're working with?
Yeah.
Because I think that would help us identify. Because here's the deal. I think there's guys listening to this podcast right now who are like me and you. It's like, I want to lead. I want the responsibility. I want the burden. For me, I always thought, man, I'd rather reinvent the wheel than have to do it somebody else's way, like feel obligated or compelled to do it somebody else's way. But then there's also men who are listening who, maybe they're comfortable following, or they're comfortable in the number 2 role, or I don't want to say it this way because I don't mean it negatively, but just being more of the worker bee, if you will. So I don't know if like who is your audience and who are we talking to here?
Yeah, I think for the people who seem to follow my show and called the Learning Leader Show, obviously you've been a guest before. The ones are the ones who have a desire, but maybe there's some of the how-to that they haven't fully figured out. Probably how, like, I'm speaking to me a little bit earlier in my career, but it's interesting when I get emails though. Some of these leaders are in senior level positions, and really, I guess the people that I'm speaking to are those who have this growth-oriented mindset to say, I don't have it all figured out yet. I never truly will, but I want to be on the path of consistent improvement, right? I know you had James Clear on, right? This thought process of an aggregation of marginal gains, of this regular improvement on a daily basis in the skill of leading people. And I certainly believe that every single person is born with the capacity or the ability to lead. It then becomes, have I made that distinctive choice? Have I raised my hand to say, yes, this is what I want to do. Now I'm going to dive deep on learning how to first lead myself. And then after as I'm continuously working on leading myself, because you obviously cannot lead anyone else until you're working and leading yourself. Now it's about we get into the details about building teams, culture, hiring practices, how to surround yourself with people who lift you up, right? Creating a personal board of advisors, having those people in your life that are willing and able to tell you when you're not performing at the level that you should and how you can get better. Those are the types of people that seem to be drawn to my work the most. The people who have more of a fixed mindset or think I don't have time for that, or they think I'm already the smartest person in the room, those people probably do not like the work that I do, and it's not for them, and that's completely fine. It's more along the people who have the mindset towards wanting to continuously improve and grow and get better.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the podcast just the nature of podcasting itself weeds the people out who aren't interested in growing. Like if you're listening to a podcast, you're investing time and energy into finding your show or my show or any number of millions of shows they could listen to. They're actively seeking information, which is a pretty good qualifier for the growth they want to see in their life. It's funny because you said, obviously you need to lead yourself first. I think that's obvious when you're a mature leader, or at least on the path to becoming a mature leader. But I know a lot of immature leaders, and that has nothing to do with age. It's just a maturity level, who don't understand that leading is you leading yourself first so that you can more effectively lead other people. Because it seems to me these immature leaders are more of the do what I say, not what I do type mentality. And they're so focused on leading externally, they've never focused on leading internally. And then they wonder why they're having a problem with getting people to follow them voluntarily.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree. And I always, one of the exercises I like to do when speaking with others is to visualize, and as a listener, you can just visualize the leaders in your life who you've really respected, wanted to follow, and then try to deconstruct why. And for me, I've been fascinated with following leaders, whether these are coaches from the football field or in the business world, that were regularly working on themselves, trying to build their skills and regularly earn credibility through knowing their stuff, being overly prepared. I think of Coach Ron Allery, one of the best football coaches I've ever played for. I knew he built confidence in his team and his followers and his players because nobody outworked him. No player, no other coach. He was the most prepared. So when he gave us a game plan for what we were going to do, we knew he had outworked the competition. We knew he was overly prepared, right? He showed us this on a daily basis. His habits, his routines, his rituals for behaving is what bred confidence into us as his players. And so that I try to emulate people like that by being the most prepared, by doing the work on a daily basis, right? And some of these things are very basic and simplistic. They're fundamentals. But that's where a lot of people aren't on top of the ball, and so that's like the exercise I would tell each person is think about who those people are in your life, and hopefully you've had some of those, who those examples are, and then really go a little bit deeper and say, well, why? Why did I want to follow them? What was it about them? What were their actual behaviors? What did they do that made me want to follow them? And then, again, don't just copy other people, but take bits and pieces from all of these great learning moments throughout your life and then implement it into your game, your personality, so you can still be authentically you, but you can take from the best of the best and make it a part of your actions moving forward for other people to follow.
I think you bring up a great point when you're talking about him being the hardest worker in the room. It seems to me, and look, I've fallen prey to this as well. We all have as leaders, is that because we've arrived at some capacity, then now we can slack off a little bit. So what you do is you take a strong player, a strong teammate, a strong employee, a strong tacticianer, and that individual excels because they're doing the work required to excel. You throw them into a leadership position, they're like, oh, cool, now I can coast. And then things end up obviously falling apart, and they have a hard time understanding why that's the case. A leader needs to work just as hard, if not harder, maybe in a different capacity as the people that he's striving to lead.
You're 100% right, and I learned this, a great quote about this from J.J. Redick when I had him on my show. He said, "You've never arrived, you're always becoming." He was giving a talk at he went back to Duke where he played college basketball, and he saw somebody had the word "arrived" tattooed on their body. And he's like, "What are you talking about, man?" The guy was a big-time recruit, and he was a freshman All-American, all this. And he said, I'm a McDonald's All-American. I'm one of the best players in the nation. I'm going to the NBA. I'm at Duke. I've arrived. And he said, "You've never arrived. You're always becoming." And I think that's the proper mindset for all of us to have, is we've never arrived. We're always becoming. As you hit all of these checkpoints of high achievement, right? And you're living proof of this right now. The reason, though, that it continuously happens for you is because you may take a brief moment to celebrate with your wife and your kids and you're happy, but then you're right back to work, like right back to it, and you get joy out of this mindset of, well, let's think, how did we get here? How did we get to the point to where we are today? We have a published book that tons of people are reading. We have millions of listeners of a podcast. We have the Iron Council with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, all of the things. How did we get here? Oh, it's because I put in the work every single day. I showed up at that small old desk with the $59 ATR 2100
That's
microphone
right,
when I was starting to get started. And now it's because I put in the work every day. And it's not sexy. It's not always the most enjoyable answer, but really it's the fact that you put in the work day after day after day. You show up. And that's one of the things I learned from my dad, right? What part of, I know this is something you talk about as a dad because you didn't necessarily have it in your life. Part of being a great dad is showing up. There's a part of my book, right? The title is
I've got it written down here. Yeah.
Your presence is required. So whether you're leading at work, you're leading a team, or you're leading your family, your active presence is required. You simply have to be there. That's not all of it, but that is certainly a big part of what it means to lead.
Yeah, I mean, that's a prerequisite, right? Just showing up is not enough. It's just a critical component. It's like step one, be there. Step two, do these other things.
Well, it's a kind of amazing though that there are bosses or leaders that we all can picture currently right now in our minds that actually didn't even do that, right? They didn't do that one table stakes foundational step. So I think when I think about people who've sustained excellence, we can't gloss over the fundamentals and the foundation of what it means to get it right. And that is one of the key parts is making sure that you're present. I had a job where I was leading a sales team all over North America, right? I knew before I accepted that job that part of what I was going to sign up for was a lot of travel, right? Because my presence is required. Meaning in person, we're going to I was a North American VP of sales. We are going to be doing field rides in your car on a regular basis. And that's part of my schedule is going to have to be that, because if I'm going to choose to do that job, right, I'm going to choose to lead in that capacity. That's part of the deal. You can't be like, nah, I can just sit in my home office and have Zoom calls. Certainly you can do that, but that's not enough. Right. And I think those are things we all need to think about as we're thrust or we're choosing to be in leadership positions.
Yeah, I mean, and also too is you don't always need to be there if you've set up the systems and processes and procedures in place to ensure that other people are filling in where you can't or where they may be better suited to do that. Because I think that's a trap that a lot of leaders fall into as well, thinking, okay, well, I've presence. Like, I guess I always have to be there at the expense of everything else. No, I mean, you don't have to do it all, but you do need to ensure that it all gets done.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I think there is the dreaded micromanager, so you never want to be put into that camp. Nobody wants that type of a manager in the business world if you're working in that sense. But the simple fact of the people know. I spoke with a CEO recently who I've been working with, and he took over for somebody else, and the previous CEO had not been seen. This is for like a manufacturing type business. Had not been seen by people in certain warehouses in years. Right. So they're like, wow, this is great that we actually saw that the guy exists in the human flesh. So I'm with you. There is a balance. You have to understand what that balance is, and that's where it gets more nuanced and more gray. But certainly presence is an important part of leadership.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like anything. You've got to strike the balance. There's moderation in it. You know, I think about that even with the Iron Councils. You know, I've fallen into the trap where it's like I don't show up at all because I'm busy doing 1,000 other things. And a lot of it's justified, but there's no reason why I can't be there to some degree. So I disengage almost completely. And then I recognize that I've disengaged, and then I overcompensate, right? So then I get 100% engaged, micromanage everything, and all the guys are like, whoa, dude, like you haven't been here forever. Now you're here doing all this stuff. So you've got to find that balancing act.
What do you think has been the key? Because at the time when we first talked, Iron Council was in its infancy, probably like a handful of people.
I don't even think when we
or maybe it
when
didn't
we
even
first did,
exist. Yeah.
it didn't exist, man.
So
When
like
you came on the podcast, it didn't even exist.
Biggest questions is, what are some of the keys to building? I mean, because this is essentially like, I don't know if you define like it's way more than a mastermind group, but it's something that people are paying either monthly or yearly amount to opt in, and they're not gonna they're gonna voice their pleasure or displeasure with their checkbook, and they're continuously opting in. What are some of the keys to being able to create such? I mean, because that's the core of your business, or at least a big part of your business.
Right.
What are how have you been able to do that?
That's a good question. I think the first thing is just starting is the biggest thing. Like just starting something. Yeah. Sometimes people think, oh, I've got to have this, because I had this vision in my mind of what I want it to be, and frankly, I'm not even there yet with what I want it to be. I could have waited. I could have waited 5 years to create this thing and it be just perfect. And even then it wouldn't be perfect, but just starting with a minimum viable product, which is what I did. Outside of that, one thing I've learned actually very well this year is that, again, I don't have to do it all. I thought I had to do it all. Like I thought everybody that were coming in the Iron Council were there to see me. It was like the Ryan show, and that I had to be there for everything. And as much as it may sting the ego a little bit, like guys are there, because of me, but they don't need me. they need the resources.
But you set up the framework and the foundation and like the program, right? So I think that's the key part, right? Before not needing you, that you've put the program in place so you could plug people in and then tap others on the shoulder to lead. Am I hearing you right?
That's exactly right. And so now I can focus on, and not that I'm doing this at the expense of the entire Iron Council, but I can focus on my core of team leaders, and I can pour fully into them, and then they can then go out and pour into their guys that they're leading.
It's awesome.
And as it continues to grow, we change the structure, and so now we have team leader mentors, and they mentor the team leaders, and the team leaders mentor the XOs, and the XOs mentor their fire teams. So we have this chain of command where I'm not individually working with 550 guys. I'm working with 20 guys, and they in turn are working with the 550.
That's awesome, man. Congrats again. It's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it is cool. Go back to one of the things you talked about with celebration, because I think this is a blessing, a curse of a lot of leaders and those who are highly ambitious, is that we have these goals and these aspirations and objectives that we want to hit, and we put our noses down, and usually it works out, right? Whether it's a week or whether it's a year, like we end up hitting our objectives. That's just the way it goes. And we don't really celebrate because we're so focused on the next thing. And that's the blessing and the curse of ambition. I'm just wondering how a leader strikes the balance between stopping and being present in the moment and celebrating victories and successes, and then shifting gears and thinking about what's next, and so on.
I identify so much with what you're saying, and I also think it's a commonality among leaders who have sustained excellence, which is a big key I try to uncover on my podcast is understanding the makeup and the dynamics and the distillation of sustaining excellence. It's funny though, the more and more I have this type of conversation about stopping and celebrating, the more rare I find it is with people who are regularly and consistently producing.
Right.
So I don't know if that's like the fun answer, because I'm with you. Like it's actually maybe a bit embarrassing. I'm trying to think of the last time we celebrated a big accomplishment. Like I remember I got a book deal from one of the big publishing houses, and I don't think we celebrated at all now. I mean, the book comes out soon. I don't know, there may be some minor thing, like any of the podcast milestones or the business hitting revenue goals. It just really we maybe briefly talk about it. Sometimes you sit back and say, wow, that's really cool. And then we just keep going.
Right.
You just keep going. And I think that's kind of just the way, again, I find that to be very common though among higher performers, is that, like, even look at Elon Musk, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars, and maybe he's crazy, so I don't know if he's a good example, but he just keeps going. And I think people like that, though, are good for the world. that they have this desire and willingness to keep going. And I think that's part of how, I mean, I bet you get the same question a lot. Ryan, can you help me create and launch a podcast? Right.
Sure.
I get it all the time. I'm sure you get it all the time. And, you know, when possible, you try to help out. You try to be a good guy. What happens almost 100% of the time? They start and then they quit.
Yeah, if they even start.
If that, right? Or they're
right.
it's too much. But for the most part, they start and then they quit. What's hard? It's hard to keep going. It's hard to be consistent. That's the hard part. And I think that's partially why, like, yes, I do think it would be more healthy just to probably stop and celebrate. But I also realize I don't know if that's just a part of my makeup. I just don't know if it is. And I don't know if that's a bad thing. You know, we when I was in the corporate world, we had these Circle of Excellence awards, and we'd have these big dinners, and you'd win Circle of Excellence if you were a top producer in the company. I worked in sales. It was cool, and we definitely celebrated that night. But I remember, like, being on the phones the very next morning, 8 a.m, making cold calls to try to win Circle of Excellence for the next year. Right. That's just the way it is. Not using all your vacation days, all of that. Is that healthy? Like, I don't know. But I also, when you deconstruct what success looks like, I mean, I know there's a lot on Twitter going around right now about not working a lot and not working long hours. And I think for the people who have been able to do that, that is awesome. Like, good for you. I'm not sure that I'm talented enough to live that way. I'm not sure. I don't know. I could be wrong. But currently, I know for me, it takes a lot of consistent work that doesn't really ever end.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think there's this level of self-awareness that you need. And you actually talk about this in the book as well, as just being self-aware as part of leading yourself, that you need to know what it is you're after. So one of the things that's really shifted for me in 2019, and of course, moving into 2020, is not so career aspirational, but very family oriented. So the business that I have, which I love, and it's a passion and it's purpose and it's meaningful and significant to me, is there to support my aspirations that I have inside the walls of my home, which means that at times, and this is difficult for me to do, is I need to throttle back on the business goals and aspirations because I'm consciously trying to lead and be ambitious in the walls of my home as I am within the walls of my business. So it's not that I'm not going to be content necessarily. It's just that I'm trying to shift gears and be ambitious in another avenue of my life that maybe I've neglected in the past.
Do you think part of that, though, is because of the success you've had? Like Jason Zook talked to me about having an enough goal. Doesn't mean like you're satisfied, but it means you're at this like enough level. Does Order of Man as a business, if you stayed flat or even dipped a little bit as far as, let's just say, revenue for 2020, do you think it's because you're at a level now where it's okay if your business stays flat, and so let's throttle back on the amount of time, or is it
that's
just like
no? That's probably a fair assessment because I've got to make enough for the family to live and survive and do the things like. I'm cautious in saying what I'm about to say because I don't want to come across as arrogant, but like our finances are taken care of, right? Like financially, we're good. Check that off. That doesn't mean we'll always be in that boat, but for now, that box is checked. So
I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, think about.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like being able to say that, I think is that's the one area that most people are not able to say. They're not able to say that right now. Going into the year, I mean, most people probably have a job or a good job and they have a decent salary, but they're not like, I don't know why I thought of it as like Forrest Gump. Like, that's just one less thing, to worry to worry about. But no, because I wonder if part of like, and that's a goal though. I mean, that could be a goal for people to say like, I want to get to the point where I can. I know you're never going to be an autopilot guy, but I can throttle a little bit now where I can oscillate more time with the family and less time just grinding like crazy on the business.
Yeah, yes, I think you're right, but I do hesitate to say like, oh, that's a luxury I have, because it makes it seem as if it isn't something that I've
Well,
had
you
to
work
put a lot of conscious effort into.
exactly. I mean, you didn't.
Right.
Nothing was given. It was
Right. Because
100%
people will say all
earned.
the time is they'll say things like, oh, well, that must be nice that you can be in that position, as if I haven't sacrificed and
Right.
spent the last, well, 9 years of my financial planning practice, 5 years with the Order of Man. Yeah, it is really nice, but it wasn't given to me. It
Right.
was something that I actually had to actively go out and earn. And now I'm in the position where I get to reap some of the benefits and rewards of the effort over the past decade and a half of work.
Right. Do you have any small fear though of saying, because I love that mindset. I think, do you have a fear though of like, well, wait a second, if I throttle back, is there a chance that we get to the point where finances are not okay? Because I think that's the fear of even
Sure.
like, I even think of like actors in Hollywood. Some of them just never stop working because they always think it's going to end. They're always fearful. I had the guys from Impractical Jokers on my show.
Oh, you did? That's awesome.
I met him in person at a show afterwards, and I even asked them. I had Sal. I was like, "What? Like, you guys are killing yourselves?" And they go, "This could end tomorrow. Like, we know this could end tomorrow." Like, they have this constant fear that it could all go away, and so they're just grinding like crazy because of that fear. And I think that's also common with people, that it doesn't even seem like they should have that fear, but they do. And part of that is what leads to some of the success.
Yeah, I don't, for me, okay, that's true, actually. Order of
Mhm.
Man could go away tomorrow. So
Mhm.
then I'll just start Order of Gentlemen or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like I don't have the skill sets to be able to create something different. I can certainly do that. I have no issue. What I'm more concerned about is that I could die tomorrow or be on my deathbed. If I'm on my deathbed, I'm not thinking about Order of Man. Sorry, guys. I'm
Right.
thinking about, oh man, I wish I would have made one more basketball game of my kids. I wish I would have taken my daughter to one more dance recital. I wish I would have sat down at the dinner table and had one more conversation with my wife. Business, dude, I can always get the business back. I could grow something else. I could start something else. Yeah, we may be rough, things financially for a year or whatever it may be until we build things up and off the ground and get them going again. But I'm never going to get the time back with my family. Like, it's not like if I put in all the work into my business for the next, let's say 10 years, well, let's say 7 years, because my oldest is 11. So I'm like, well, this could go away. So for the next 7 years, I'm just going to work really hard, and then I'll spend time with my family. Well, in 7 years, my oldest son is 18. He's gone, man.
Yeah.
Like, he's out of the house. In 7 years, I can always start another business in 7 years. I can't always be able to roll around with my 11-year-old. And that's the priority for me.
I love that perspective. Have you talked to Jason Fried yet, from CEO of Basecamp?
No, huh?
You should. I'll try to make an intro if you want. He's about building a business that, because there's some of the mentality of like, let me just grind for the next 10 years and then I can relax. He's like, that never happens. The people just they're not able to so like he believes in setting up a calm business. So is their growth going to be crazy? No, but they're always going to be profitable, right? And it really had an impact on me, on how I think about my business as well. The same thing with you, which is, wait, yes, I could get paid a great chunk of change to go give a speech on that Saturday, but there's a volleyball tournament for my daughter on that Saturday.
Right.
I'm not going.
Right.
Oh, that one happens to be on my wife's birthday. I'm not going. And I think those are some of the trade-offs that we choose to make at times, in order to make sure that our priorities are straight, right? Our priorities are intact, and you're actually like having to live up to your values and your priorities, because that's when you really know what you value, or know what your values are, or when you have to make those tough decisions of yes or no, I'm going to go or I'm not. Because no, I say my family is first. Well, my actions must follow if I actually mean that. And it sounds like obviously you're doing that daily now, which I think is really cool. It's inspiring for all the guys who are following you to say, yeah, this can happen.
I mean, I hope it is, but my other thought is that there's guys who are listening and that are connected with what you're doing and what we're doing, who are not in that position, right? So they're thinking, hey man, if I've got an opportunity to go make a couple $1,000 this weekend by picking up some side work. Well, we've got a mortgage payment to make. So like, I got to go do that, even if it's my wife's birthday.
Yeah, I agree, man.
And there's times where I would say, yeah, you're right, because your job is to provide, and part of that is financially. And so if you're not in that boat yet, you make your decisions and you do what's in the best interest and you do the best you can, and then you work towards a better future, a different future.
I 100% agree. I think that is, and that is probably the norm for a lot of people. And I get it. So in a way, I feel a bit of privilege, but I also know, like you've said, a lot of that has come from the work leading up to that, though. But I get it. I understand it from both perspectives.
Yeah, I guess ultimately you've just got to strike, like you said earlier, strike that balance on what you should be doing. Let's shift gears a little bit here. As far as, we talked a lot about leading yourself. Obviously, you go into depth in the book on different strategies and principles in order to do that. And I encourage everybody to pick up a copy of the book because it's very, very valuable. A lot of great information in there. Let's talk about leading outside, because again, we're talking about, all right, we've got this stuff locked in. We're doing the things for ourselves. Now, how do you start turning that around and focusing it outwards, and then leading people and influencing people to where you'd like them to go and where they themselves would probably like to go as well?
Yeah, I think there's so much here, and I've been fortunate to have 350 plus of these conversations on my podcast, as well as learn from great mentors that have helped shaped my view on what it means to be a leader, of helping to provide purpose and see the power in somebody else that they might not even see themselves, and then helping them unleash it for themselves. There's a difference, not just the barking orders, and so somebody does what you say, but I'm a big believer that compliance can be commanded, but commitment cannot. So my goal is to help people build committed followers, build committed teams, build committed organizations, not compliant ones. We've all been in those organizations where we've been you talked about it earlier, right? You've been forced to comply because that's the way it is, and if you don't comply, you'll get fired. So you'll comply because you need the job, you need the money, whatever. And there are a lot of people.
That's a weak motivator, right? Yeah. Relative to being influenced to do it.
But then we've also hopefully been influenced by those types of leaders who you've so badly wanted to commit to. That great boss, great coach, great mentor who you were committed to them by your choice because you were motivated by their actions, by their care, by their love, by their ability to see the power in you and help raise you to levels that were higher than you thought possible. So that's the type of leader that I want to be, that I want to help others be, when it comes to this big, broad term of what it means to be an excellent leader. And there's so much to unpack, but that's at a high level. That's what I initially think of.
Yeah, well, I like the distinction between, I don't know if leading is the right word, but you mentioned the word influence, and I really like that word because you can, like you said, you can command people to do things, but influence is about getting other people to voluntarily agree, right? So if I'm going to be influential to you to go make those calls, or to lead your team effectively, then you have to voluntarily say, okay, yep, I'll decide to be influenced by you. So how do you build up influence with other people?
I think first it's good to point out that influence has no title. So because some of the emails I get as well, I don't have the title, or I'm not the boss, or they don't work for me. Well, I think I learned early on in the working world that there is positional leadership, meaning they lead based on their title.
Sure.
And then there's influential leadership, which we're talking about now. It's being the type of person who is regularly adding value to the lives of other people, always seeking opportunities or ways to add value to the lives of others that you're surrounded by, and voluntarily running towards the fire, right? That's like, if your house is on fire, I know what you'd be doing, right? You're going to run towards that. Why others are going to run away.
Sure.
And and that's the metaphor, obviously, but thinking about that from your life perspective is being the type of person who is willing and able and desires to run towards the challenges, to help solve them, to be the person who's willing to dig in those situations, because then, like, if you build a reputation of being that type of person, who do you think people are going to want to go to?
Of course. Right.
Anyone could lead. Think about like any sports team. Like anyone can lead. I know your son plays football. I've seen the pictures. Like anyone can be a leader when his team is winning. I want to see the guys on his team who step up when they're losing.
Yeah.
When they're knocked on their back. Like how does he treat the guy who gets knocked on his back? Is he going to help him up, right? Or is he going to give some words of affirmation that are needed when things are going bad, right? That's when real leadership and character is exposed, is when things are bad. So that's to me is really the key point, is when I think influence is revealed, is seeing how people handle and even go after the tough moments and try to tackle the tough problems and solve those, as opposed to just being like, oh yeah, things are great. Yeah, I'm the captain. Let's go. I mean, anybody can do that. And a lot of people do. It's the ones who step up when times are tough.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about this positional leadership, because I think, to a degree that might give you a little bit of authority. It certainly gives you some assumed credibility. But even still, you find those people out very quickly, right? So even if you have this manager who has this title, you're going to follow them initially. But if they don't prove that they have that influence behind it, that positive influence behind it, it's not long before this person has a mutiny on their hands. The one thing I'm curious though about when you're saying that influence doesn't have a title, I think the reason that let's say somebody's listening to this podcast and they want to lead, they want to step up, they don't have a title, maybe they're relatively new relative to the other people in the organization or business. I think that they may be worried about two things: stepping on people's toes or being like the brown noser that just gets on everybody's nerves. Do you think that's the case, or is it something else?
Yeah. Well, so especially if you're working for an insecure boss, right? Robert Greene will tell you, never outshine the master. So this is where some of your, I think the emotional intelligence comes in with leadership. I've been in this position before and I've messed it up. Absolutely messed it up. If you are working around or for people that are insecure, that are the ones who are who have not necessarily done the work on themselves, low self-awareness, those types of people, the world is very gray, right? It's not black and white in this regard. So it's being very careful about how you go about it, right? Giving that person credit, trying to build coalitions from within, certainly never doing anything to outshine that person, because that's the quickest way to create a separation, is if you're working for those types of people. And so this is where I don't necessarily love that world, but we have to live in reality. Like there are a lot of guys listening who are like, yep, that's my boss. That's right. Exactly him. And I have to be careful about that. And so for me, it was just understanding each, even if it was my idea, and I didn't feel like this was manipulative. I felt like this is kind of a survival mechanism. I would give credit to him. I would regularly say, remember when we talked about this and you mentioned this. Like I would just regularly play into the ego of somebody else if I knew that's the way they were. Now, I don't think I would ever sign up for a long-term relationship for this type of person, right?
Definitely.
I would be looking for other opportunities, and this is what I did, looking for other opportunities. But again, we have to provide for our families. And so in that case, sometimes that means making money. We have house payments and cars and kids and food, right? So you can't just abruptly quit when you face yourself in a situation with a person like that. But it's understanding how to deal with those types of people, give them more credit than they deserve, keep them happy. I don't necessarily think that's brown nosing. I think that's understanding people. I think it's understanding power dynamics. That gets deep at a deep level from a psychological perspective.
I think it's a good point, and you talk about survival. I think it's more than survival. I think it's a very effective strategy to excel.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
if you help your boss win or your manager win, and
Mhm.
and that person then goes on and gets promoted, well, like who's going to take his spot over?
Right.
Obviously, he's probably going to lean more towards the guy that helped him get to that point. Now, if he
Right.
sees you as a threat, that may not be the case. So you don't want to be the threat, right? You want to be the person who's helping that individual win. But in the meantime, like you said, you're looking for opportunities
Right.
elsewhere. You're developing your own skills. I remember when I was considering leaving the financial planning practice, if I remember correctly, I knew that I was going to be leaving about 7 to 8 months before I left.
Wow.
And it would have been hard for me to stick around in that financial planning firm had I not been thinking of it in the context of this is a moment and an opportunity for me to learn about business on somebody else's dime.
Mhm.
So I took full advantage of all of the training. I learned how to run my books. I learned how to market, trainings that were available in the office. I went to every single one of those. I invested time and energy. And that way, when I left, I had all this knowledge that somebody else had helped me acquire, and I didn't have to go learn in the school of knocks on in the schoolyard. You know what I mean? Like on the playground itself. Like I had to learn that stuff.
Well, I mean, I think it's great advice to people currently who are doing kind of things we've done. We both started our podcast and our businesses on the side while working full-time jobs, and both eventually left to do this full-time. That wasn't my initial goal. I don't know if it was yours, but I do think it can be amazing to follow your passion, curiosity, and obsessions with great rigor on the side, because in a way it creates this freedom for you. I don't know if you felt this, but I felt more I felt like I was not invincible, but I could speak truth to power because I had this fun thing I was doing on the side that I knew at some point could potentially be what I do full time. And it actually made me a better employee. It made me a better
Totally.
boss. It made me better for my boss because I wasn't felt like I never had the feeling if I get fired, like I'm in trouble. I know I'm good. Right. And so that's why I encourage people to follow something they're really curious about on the side. It don't even think about this could become a business, but if you are focusing on it on a daily basis, maybe it could, and you'll find you'll actually probably become better at your job. Remember when I was working and had people reporting to me, there were some people that had these really big interests on the side. I remember one guy in specifics, he owned a CrossFit gym, and I loved it. He was one of my best employees. Did he work as much as others on the day job? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
But he was much more productive when he did work, and he was excited. He was passionate, and I think I gave him a freeing kind of a feeling by saying, "Talk to me about this gym. Like I want to go to it. I want to see what it's all about. Why are you passionate about it?" And he did it with his wife. Like, so I think that those are some things to think about too for guys. When you do have some extra time, instead of watching Netflix or TV or any of that, it's seeing like what are you kind of curious about, and then going down that rabbit hole more than just chilling and relaxing in your free time when you're not with your family.
Yeah. Well, and I also think just taking a step in the unknown, right? Because what
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people will do is think, okay, I have to have this whole thing figured out before I can leap into something else. No, man, you just have to take a step.
Mm-hmm.
You started a podcast when you had another business to run. I started a podcast when I had another business to run. Like I didn't think it would turn into Order of Man. It just turned into it over time because I took one step,
Yep.
then another step, then another step, then another step, and here we are 5 years later in the position that we are. Not because something miraculous happened one night,
Yeah.
but because there was an infinite number of little steps that pushed
Right.
us in the right
You
direction.
you don't set long-term goals, do you?
I don't. I
Yeah.
have a longer term vision essentially for the type of individual I want to be.
Uh-huh.
And then I break it down into quarterly goals.
Right. I thought so. It's from reading. Yeah, I'm with you. I was curious what you thought about like 1, 3, 5 year plans. Like I really struggle to make those. Like I think they're just pure guesses for the most part of like what could happen business wise.
Well, that's the thing. Like
You
go
know?
back 5 years in your
There's
life.
no
Like anybody's
way.
listening, like go back 5 years and ask yourself if there's any plan that you could have put together that would have calculated for all the variables and unknowns and technology and everything that you've experienced over 5 years. Absolutely not. So you're just setting yourself up for failure when you start planning 90 days, yeah, I've got a pretty good idea of what's going to be happening in 90 days. And I can see trends that I might want to move towards in that time frame.
Well, yeah, and I think the analogy, I spoke with Allison Levine. She summited Mount Everest, and she's like, really, my focus was on the 3 feet in front of me, and it just was a bunch of times I just had to say, the next step, okay, 3 feet, 3 feet, 3 feet, and I was like, that's really the metaphor I feel like for the way to do this is. And again, you and I feel like we have this in common of just consistently moving forward. It's not like huge leaps. It's the next step, but never really stopping, just continuously going. And then before you know it, you look down and you're like, whoa, I'm on the top of this mountain. And now I'm going to go climb another one. But that's kind of the mindset of progression.
I learned somewhere along the way, and I can't remember who taught me this concept to work so well. They said, always make a decision to withdraw or quit or throw in the towel at your next milestone. So for example, like running is a great analogy. If you're like, okay, I'm tired, my legs are tired, I don't want to do this anymore, this is stupid. I used to tell myself, well, just get to that road sign right there. You can decide to quit once you make it to that road sign, but you make it to that road sign first. And then more often than not, what would happen is I'd get to that road sign and I'm like, I might be able to go to that next stoplight up there. So I'll quit after I make it to that stoplight. Well, the same thing is true in your business. The same thing is true in relationships, or if you're trying to get fit. Like, always delay the decision to throw in the towel till the next milestone, because that next milestone you actually might feel pretty good and it will get you to the next one. That's served me very, very well.
I love that mindset. I think it's so true. And now I think back to like actually running and that being a big thing for me too, because I'm with you.
Yeah.
It's like, this hurts.
Yeah.
But that's part of like the growth, and also part of, you don't fully know what you're capable of until you put yourself in those positions to stretch. And so whether it's physically and physically can manifest itself mentally as well. But I know I'm physical like you are. Like, I think the working out physically can really impact you mentally and create more of those mental calluses for yourself to be able to continue to keep going through the hard stuff. Like, I'm building this massive online course right now with a ton of videos, and the written part of it is essentially writing a whole nother book. And looking at the whole project, it's like, no way. But it's like, okay, let me get this next lesson done. And then I'm going to get the next lesson done. I'm going to film the next lesson. And I'm going to write that one. Okay, here's the action steps. Oh, now we got to design it. Okay. And it's just like each step, they'll get each one done. And now I look back and I'm like, I'm 90% done with this thing, right? There's no way I'm quitting now. I am 90% done. This giant project that at the beginning looked like this might take a year. Well, we just kept going. Going, and now here we are, and we're close to the finish line of this big deal.
It's awesome, man. I'm excited to see what you put together. I mean, the same concept I was working out with my son, my oldest son, the other night, and he was doing some push presses with these center mass bells that we have from Sornex. They're actually really cool. They're just like hollowed out bells, and they've got handles inside of them. So he's doing push press with these things. I'm like, hey, like, use these ones. And they are a little heavier. He's like, no, those are too heavy. I'm like, well, how do you know? He's like, because I know how to do these ones. And I said, well, that's great. Like, you're strong enough to handle those, but don't you want to be stronger? He's like, yeah. I said, you're never going to get stronger using the same weights you're always using. Like, you got to ramp it up. He's like, yeah, but I won't be able to do as much as I can with those. I said, right, but you're going to exert more effort, more energy, use more of your muscle mass, build up more muscle mass, even though you're doing fewer reps because these are heavy. So he got the heavier ones and he was pushing them. He's like, these are hard. I'm like, yeah, but imagine in 2 months where those are going to become like the ones that you're using now. He's like, oh yeah, that's cool. And so he's hooked on these new ones now, which is really cool.
What a powerful like learning moments you're creating for your sons and your daughter. I think that's pretty amazing. And really what that is to me, what it says is constantly be living at the edge of your current competency and comfort zone. I use both of those for my life, because you're having regular conversations. You are having regular conversations with people who are going to stretch you from an intelligence perspective. And then you also do that from a physical perspective. So if you're regularly living at the edge of that zone where you're going over it on a regular basis, the edges stretch. They get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you look back at after a year of consistently stretching, and it's a much bigger being. And so whether it's your brain or your muscle or your ability to persevere and during tough moments, if your mindset is, I'm going to regularly put myself on the edge and a little bit over the edge of my comfort and competency zone, you'll be a smarter leader, be a better leader, be stronger. There's so much benefit from just living in that zone.
Absolutely, 100%. I want to go back. I think I got so excited anyways, talking and having this conversation. I wanted to hit on the topic or the title of your book, which is Welcome to Management. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of words we could use for leading, right? Influence, leadership, management. What would you say is the distinction, if there is any, between management and leadership?
Yeah, it's a great question. And real quick, the titling of a book, and I don't know if you had yours from the beginning. I did not. So I had hundreds of different options, but I sent early drafts to a lot of people who had been on my show who had written best-selling books, and I actually got the title of my book from Liz Weissman, who wrote Rookie Smarts and Multipliers, both really good books. Because Welcome to Management was like it's really about that moment in your life when you make the leap from individual contributor to now leading a team of your own in the business world, and where you become now a manager. And that's a big, big leap. And I've made that leap, and I've also made the leap from then leading leaders, where you're a manager of managers. But I think the biggest one is that first jump where you're only responsible for yourself to now responsible for a team. From a leadership versus management perspective, and really I break it down into three aspects. It's leadership, it's managing, and it's coaching. And I think there are three distinct different aspects of that role if you're in a position like that where people report to you. From a leadership perspective, I really believe this is about the person who is understanding the power and helping others unleash that power within them. You're also providing some purpose, direction, vision, aligning expectations, right? There is an inspiration aspect of that. Management, to me, is the part of the job that I didn't want to do initially when I got the job. I remember I called my dad when I got my first management role. I was 27, and I said, look, I'm going to tell the inspirational stories. I'm going to be there for the team. Somebody else can handle the management part of like the numbers and understanding the system. And he stopped me cold in my tracks, and he said, don't you ever say that again. You've got to do all three to do your job well: lead, manage, and coach. And so managing is more like figuring out how to work within the constraints of the system that you're in. You have to administer the stewardship of resources as a manager. Managers don't need to exist if there were unlimited budgets and unlimited teams and not deadlines. That's why managers exist. So be grateful for that, because that's why your job, if you are a manager, exists. Then coaching is what you are. It's what you need to be. And there's two forms of coaching when you're leading other people: coaching for development and coaching for performance. So coaching for development is long-term, investing in that person to help them develop as a person, as a leader, if that's what they want, to help them develop from a career perspective. Coaching for performance is this micro 7-minute conversation that you have with someone potentially who works for you to say, let's talk about this particular instance. What went well, what didn't, how could we improve? These micro moments that are regularly happening so that their performance on a daily basis is improving, but you're also taking care of them from a development perspective. I think you've got to do all three of those: lead, manage, and coach. And the best bosses I've had in my life figured out how to do those well. And the bad ones, in most cases, didn't do any of them well, or were average at all of them, or didn't think it was part of their role to be a coach, for example. And right. I think that's a mistake, because that's part of your job if people report to you, is to help coach them.
I like that trifecta. I never thought about it from that context. I thought you've got leaders, you've got managers, and separately you've got coaches, and you're talking about incorporating all three elements into being an effective leader.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When earlier you had talked about finding those leaders and managers and mentors who you admired, respected, were influenced by in a positive way, and you were talking about taking bits and pieces of, what this individual brings and what you like about this individual and how that person inspired you, and then creating your own techniques and strategies and styles of leadership. How do you begin to incorporate some of this stuff? Because it seems like, well, I'll give you an example. A lot of people feel overwhelmed and have even sent me emails, about all the books that I've suggested. It's like, how do I read all these books and implement them? Or how do I listen to every podcast that you've ever recorded and then implement all of it? I'm like, well, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you begin to prioritize where you should put emphasis of learning and your attention and resources?
Yeah, I think and you probably learned this too. I've learned that some of the leaders who have been sustaining excellence have built frameworks for how they behave and the choices they make. And so I've ended up kind of creating my own framework for how I make choices and behave that helps steer me a little bit better. So I'll try to make it as quick as possible, but this is like if I mapped out an ideal day when it comes to development. So every day there's really 4 things that I think need to happen for me for it to be a quality development day. One, I need to be a consumer of knowledge, of information. So reading books, having long form conversations with a mentor, recording podcasts, listening to podcasts, speaking with others who are smarter than me. That's the consumer side. That's the intake engine that I need to have. That's part of my framework to behave. 2, and this is really important in what kind of answering your question, you can't just be a learner. You have to be a doer. So you have to experiment based on your learning. So let's say you're learning about, a mutual friend of ours, Cal Newport, talks about deep work, right? So that was part of the intake engine for today. So Cal says that I should block out an hour of my time for deep work today. So this is just one example. I'm going to experiment with that for the next 5 days. That's part of the experimentation phase of my learning, right? Of my framework for behavior is I have to experiment. I have to actually do it. Third, then, and very important, in a step that I skipped too many times, you have to take a step back, reflect, and analyze based on what you've taken in and what you've experimented with. I learned this. I put this into play. Now I'm analyzing what worked, what didn't, what should I continue to do, right? This is part of the framework of reflecting and understanding that. And then fourth, and this is something you do a lot, and I've been doing it a lot, is the best form for me of learning is teaching, right? Writing a book, giving a keynote speech, doing a solo podcast episode, the best form of learning, because in order, like when you're filming, let's say you're getting ready to film a video in your car that's going to go in your Facebook group, I'm guessing you have got clarity of thought prior to hitting record, right? You have an idea of what you're going to say. You have an idea of what you believe. You've thought about that. So the process of preparing to share what you've learned to help teach other people is the moment learning takes place, right? I know I have a really big keynote next week for a crowd that's very important to me. And, I have a really good feeling about what I'm going to say. I know my talk. But leading up to that, I'm going to practice and rehearse and prep and write, and I will get crystal clarity of my belief system of what I think through the process of now teaching that to high-level leaders at another place. So this 4-step process for me is how to then know, okay, this is my intake engine, right? I'm a consumer of information, of knowledge. These are my experimentations of what I've learned, of what I've taken in. I've reflected on that to figure out, did this work? Did it not? Why did it work? Why didn't it? What should I continue to do? What should I stop doing? And now I'm going to get very clear on what I believe and what I think, and it's so clear that I can intelligently teach other high-level performers. And so when you go through those 4 steps on a regular basis, I find that the stuff that you want to continue that you're picking up from others stays in, and the stuff that maybe you learn but is not useful for you it just self-selects out. And
Right.
that has been my regular process for behavior for a few years now, and it's been very helpful as I've tried to find my voice and help other people and build a business. That has been a good mode for me. It was to know very clearly, this is how I behave. This is what I'm going to do. And everyone, I think, needs to create that for themselves, and it's not all the same for everybody. You got to figure out what works best for you, but that's what has worked best for me.
Right on. I like it, man. I like it. Well, let me ask you a couple additional questions as we wind down today. The first one, what does it mean to be a man?
To me, I think leadership is a big part of what it means to be a man. Obviously, women lead as well, but I think the way I view it is I'm leading a team, I'm leading a family, so I need to that's part of the definition for me. I am inspired by people who follow and chase their curiosity and obsessions with great rigor, and I think that those are the types of people that I want to be around. Those are the types of guys that I want to be around, is that they have this mode of this is why I think you and I get along, is because your standard mode of operation is to aggressively pursue what you're curious about, to learn more, to understand, with the purpose of you learning, but also others learning along with you. And so I really think that is an aspect of what it means to stand up and be a man.
Right on, brother. I appreciate it. I like it. How do we connect with you? Obviously, you've got the book coming out, Welcome to Management. Of course, I encourage everybody to pick up a copy, because if you want to lead in some capacity or manage and or coach, then it would be a great resource for you.
Yep.
So how do we connect with you, man?
Yeah, man. Appreciate that. So Twitter and Instagram are at RyanHawk12, and my website's learningleader.com. All the stuff in my book, Welcome to Management's there. We got a bunch of pre-order bonuses. Trying to really show my publisher, McGraw-Hill, that we're gonna crush any metrics they put in place and goals they have when it comes to pre-order. So I really appreciate like you mobilizing your army of men to come after this book. And I certainly I put really my life's work into it. So I'm not shy about promoting this. Because I firmly believe it can have that type of ripple effect. I think bad bosses are a real problem, and I think the work that I've published in this book, Welcome to Management, can help you be a more effective leader and impact people in a positive way, and realize the power that you have when you're in those positions, because you are impacting so many others. And I really wrote the book that I wish I had when I first got promoted, and now I'm fortunate that it's done and it's out there for you to get. So I really appreciate you doing that. And also, I do have a text sign up. If you happen to be listening on your phone, you can text the word learners, LEARNERS, learners to 44222, and you get all my stuff in that regard too.
Right on. Well, I know the book certainly does all that you had just talked about. Really good book, great information. I've appreciated our friendship and getting to know each other, and then watching your path as well, because you've been inspiring to me. So I appreciate it, man. We'll get this information out to all the guys. There's a bunch of pre-order stuff, I think, like bonuses and things like that you'd mentioned. So guys, take advantage of that. The book comes out later this month, but take advantage of the pre-order offers. Yep. All right, Ryan, I appreciate you, brother. Thanks for joining me again.
Hey, man, my pleasure as always. And let's make the gap between our next conversation that we record shorter. This has been so much fun, man.
For sure.
Love it.
Right on. Thanks, brother.
Yeah, man.